Hi everybody, it's Jennifer from Farmfresh Fabrics here to show you a new tutorial that we have called a charming table runner. Isn't it really cool? This finishes at about 54 inches long by about 18.5 inches wide. It goes together really easy. It's just made from a charm pack, a little bit of extra fabric. We use a yard and 5/8 fabric, and that will do the backing, this inside border, which is like an accent border, and your binding. Anyway, this is our charming table runner. It is really easy, and we're going to show you how to make it right now. Also, if you notice, the binding has some odd angles. They're actually 135-degree angles here. There's 4 of them. We are going to have a separate video to show you how to put the binding on. It's going to cover odd angles, it's going to cover 90-degree angles, it's going to cover how to meet up your ends. So this is our charming table topper. Again, it's 54 inches long by 18.5 inches wide, and there'll be a separate tutorial video on how to do the binding. So let's get started. So what you'll need to make this table runner isn't very much at all. So you'll need a charm pack. This is a Moda Farmhouse 2 charm pack. These are 5-inch squares. You'll need at least 40 of them. These have 42 in them. So if you're not getting a Moda, just make sure you know the count in the pack. You'll need at least 40 squares, or you can cut your own. So again, 5-inch squares. This is a Moda charm pack. And then for the accent and the binding and the backing, so I'm using a Moda Bella Solids called Porcelain that's going to match my charm pack. You could choose, and you'll need 1 5/8 yard of this to do all 3 of those things. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take our charm pack here. We're going to open it up. Again, this has like 42 squares in it. We need about 40 for this project. But first, we got to separate it into our main portion, and then we'll have extras for the border. So the charm packs usually come colored, coordinated, not all the times, but a lot of times Modas do. So like our darker ones, the peach, the turquoise, and stuff is all together. So we're going to take this, and we're going to sort through this first. And what I like to do is keep my prettier ones that I like the most for the main part. So we're just going to kind of lay these all out so you can see. I need to pick 19 of them that I'm going to keep whole. And then I'm going to pick 5 of them that I want for the main part. Like these plain white ones here, I'm going to just throw those aside because those are going to be my 2 extra ones I don't need. So my prettier, the ones that I like the most, the biggest prints, the biggest color, weight, stuff like that, those are the ones that I'm going to keep to keep as a 5-inch square. And the rest of them we'll be using either for some of our half square triangles. Well, they're not really half square triangles, they're just squares cut in half, or for our border. So here, I'm just going to kind of whip these all out so you can see. And I definitely kind of want to keep these ones with the words as my extra ones, I think, because I don't like those as much. So see the colorways that come out of here. We have, here's some darker ones. So like these ones that are mostly solid, I'm probably going to use for the border. And some charm packs, you know, there's 2 of each print. So what I'm going to do now is take 19 that I love the most, and we're going to keep them as whole squares. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 18, and let's just go with this one for 19. Okay? So those are my 19 whole squares I'm going to leave whole. All right? Then out of this pile here that I didn't use, I need to pick 5 that I'm going to be using, that we're going to cut in half to use for the edges. And these here, I'm going to set aside the rest for later for our border. Okay? So these 5 here that I picked out, we're going to cut them in half diagonally. So I'm just going to do 1 here. Okay, so we're going to take our square here, and we're going to do this for the 5 that we picked out. Just the 5, not the first 19. We leave the 19 whole, so just the 5 that we picked out here. These we're going to cut in half diagonally from corner to corner. So place your ruler from corner to corner and go ahead and slice them so you'll have pieces that look like this. And you're going to do this for all 5 of these that you picked out. All right. So let me cut these and we'll be right back. Okay, so once you've got all 5 of these cut into your half square triangles here, we're going to put our cutter aside for now, and we're going to start laying out our blocks. All right. So again, we have 19 that we left whole, and we have 5 squares that we cut in half diagonally, so we only have 10 of these triangle-y pieces here, okay? So there should be 10 of these total because you cut 5 in half. So what we're going to do here is lay these out, and you want to try to, don't think too hard about this, but I'm just going to move my piles aside here so I can start. So our rows are going to go kind of diagonally as we do this. So you're thinking in rows, but our rows aren't going to be straight across. They're going to be at an angle, okay? It's like a quilt set on point. So we're first going to put our first one down here, and this is a whole square. And then, again, there's no rhyme or reason, just kind of pick some, and we can go back and rearrange this way. I like to lay it out first. So there's our second piece, which is another whole square. And then to finish this diagonal row off, you're going to take one of these half squares that we picked out, and you're going to put it like this. See how it goes here? There's our triangle, and the flat part is up here, which will be the top. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. I know it'll be out of the camera a little bit, but I'm going to zoom out later to let you see the whole thing planned out. All right? So there's our row number 1, if we will. Then we're going to start again on the second row here. And again, we're going to have another hole. And let's put this white one in here, another hole. This one gets 3 holes and a half. Some charm packs have like a lot of different prints and colors. Others have minimal. This one doesn't have that many. So, and you can always switch that pile we set aside. Nothing's set in stone yet. Nothing's sewn together. So if you need to switch some of the 19 with some of the ones that you left aside, feel free to do that too. So I think we're going to put this black and white check one here. So there's our first row and our second row, which will be 3 squares and a half square. And then we're going to do, our next row now is going to start with a half square. Again, your widest part comes down here at the end. All right. And then we're going to have 3 more squares and a half square. And we're going to have 3 rows like this. Start with a half, and then 1, 2, 3 whole ones here, and finish this off with a half. And again, we're going to have 3 whole rows like this one. So I'm going to lay the next 3 out here. Again, we're going to start with a half, and like I said, if you need to change with your keep for later pile to make some more prints and stuff happen, you can do that. There's no right or wrong thing for here. 3, place 1 here. We're going to keep going here. So we have 1, 2, we're going to have our third row. That's going to start with the triangle, and 1, 2, and 3, and then a triangle print. And then after this is where we're going to start coming back down. So now we're going to do like these first 2 rows here, but reversed. So this next one here starts with a half triangle, and then we have 1, and we have 2, and we're going to have 3, and then our last row here we'll start with a triangle, and 1 and 2, but I can't use this one because it's the same, so we're going to switch this one over here for this one, I think. Okay, here is our full piece. Here's our final piece. So again, over on this side here we have 1, 2 and a half square. Then the second row is 1, 2, 3 and a half square. Then half, 1, 2, 3 and a half, and we have 3 rows like that. So half, 1, 2, 3 and a half, 1, 2, 3 and a half, half. This is where we start going down. 1, 2, 3 and a half, 1, 2. And this is our final table runner right here. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew these rows together. This right here is a row. This right here is a row. This right here is a row. Sew these together, 1/4 inch seam, okay? So you just flip these together, and they should be the same size here, and you'll sew a 1/4 inch seam, all right? And then you'll flip this one, so pretend that's sewn there. You'll flip these together, and you'll sew a 1/4 inch seam, all right? What you want to do for these triangles that are the half squares is line up your 90-degree angles for these triangles here, okay? So that's what you're going to do next. Sew your rows together, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so we've sewn it all together now, all right? I didn't press anything, obviously. It's still all wrinkly. I just want you to see what it looks like. And your points will come, when you sew it together, it's going to be like this, and that's okay. It's going to have a little bit of a, where it doesn't cover, but until we sew the rows together, you're going to lose some of that excess there, so don't worry about that right now. It's okay if it looks like this. It's supposed to, all right? So your cut side of the triangle is always going to face the top and the bottom edges. So I like to sew it together and just lay it out just to make sure it looks right before I press it. So I think we're good. It's, you know, it's wonky shape, but it's okay. So you can see the shape of the table runner here, even though it's not put together straight right now. It's all good. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to iron these, press them. All right, so what we want to do so that our seams will nest, because we want our points to be as nice as we can get it together here with our points. So we're going to iron them, and I like to press mine all to the side. If you want to press your seams open, press them open by all means. I find it's easier to get your intersections to lock together, to nest together better if they're pressed to the side. So what I'm going to do is this side here, I'm going to press going in one direction. And I'm going to press this row with the seams going in this direction, and press this row here and alternate back and forth and back and forth. So when you lock, or when you put your seams together, they will, when you put your rows together, the seams will lock, because when we flip this over, this one will be facing this way and the one underneath will be facing this way. So I'm going to head this over to the iron, and I'm going to press these, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I just grabbed the first 2 rows and brought them over here just so you can see. So I laid them out how they're going to go together, all right? So what I'm going to do with this one, and it doesn't matter which side, which way you go on the first one, I'm going to flip this over like this, and I'm just going to take my iron, and I'm just going to very carefully push the seams to one side and press. And push those seams to that same side and press. And yes, my iron is really cool. I love this iron, but I dropped it and my cover broke from my spray thing, so yes, I have some bias tape and a rubber band securing that together because I love this iron. It steams wonderfully when I need to use it for steam projects, so that is what it is. All right, so these seams go this way. So now this row, we want the seams to go this way. So I'm just going to carefully move this out of the way. I'm going to flip it over right like it is, and I want my seams to go this way. Now I like to iron everything this way, so hopefully this won't confuse you. So what I'm going to do is just take it and rotate it like this, so I can still press my iron this way. Because for me, I can only do one way that works right for me. If you can multitask and go both directions with the iron, but for some reason I can only go one direction. It must just be something in my brain that does it that way. I don't know. So that's what we're doing. So these seams, when I press it, put it back the right way and put this the right way. So it's going to go together like this. Yeah, like this. All right. So when I flip this over here and put this on top, you will see that this one on top here, the seams are heading in this direction. And this one on the bottom, the seams are heading in the opposite direction, so that when I put my seams together, because these are the first 2 rows that are going to go together, I want my seam to nest. So hopefully you can catch that there. So my seam, this one goes this way, and the one down here is going to go this way. And I want to put my pieces together so that my seams will butt up against each other and they will nest. And I usually like to put a pin there. I don't pin a whole lot when I sew, but I am going to kind of make sure these are locked into place right where I want them to be, and I will put a pin just right at those seam lines and call that good. I don't pin the rest, but I do pin those sections there. You don't have to pin if you don't want to pin, but I like to pin just to kind of keep so that my intersections get perfect. Are they always perfect? Heck no, but we're going to try as hard as we can. So hopefully the camera can catch that. We're going to nest those seams. So I'm going to go ahead and iron all the rows in opposite directions, pin them together, sew them together, and then we will have our completed inside portion of our table mat. So we'll be right back. We have our middle section of our table topper all sewn together, all pressed together. Our points match up pretty good. Your final pressing, when you put your rows together, it doesn't matter which way you press it. I personally kind of think it's easier to press those seams open. I didn't actually do that on this one. I pressed them all to one side. Just have it pressed nice and smooth. Keep in mind that these edges here are now all on the bias, so don't stretch them too much as you press because they'll stretch out of proportion a little bit. So here's our final piece. All we have to do now is cut off, we have little nubby thingies sticking out here at our edges. Let me see if I can zoom in there a little bit. We have the little nubby things sticking out there. So we're going to want to trim all those off. And I'm just going to take my rotary cutter. And the only reason we're going to do this is just because it saves some bulk. And if you have, like this one here isn't exactly even, so just cut it as even as you can. Hopefully they all more look like this one, where everything comes across nice and even for you. So we're just going to go ahead and trim these all off. And these are like a prime example of how it should look together. They should come up, they should touch, the two triangle pieces should touch right there at the top. We are going to lose our points here when we put our border on. That's mainly just because we didn't cut, these triangles weren't cut bigger than our block size, where they were cut the same size and just cut in half because we're using a charm pack. Just kind of go through here, trim off all this excess fabric at all your points, and we'll get ready for our next part. Now, I don't know if I told you this at the beginning or not, this doesn't actually require measuring after, like there's not really any measuring. We're going to use our piece here for our measurements for our borders. Okay, so we trim this, and for right now we're going to set this aside. Just as we have this whole hunk of fabric, and yes, I called it a hunk of fabric because it's a really cool word to use. I'm just going to get rid of my scraps here or else they're going to get caught in my fabric. Now I would normally do this next part on my bigger cutting mat, but I didn't want it here in the video, so I'm using my smaller one, so I'm just going to have to fold it a little bit more. So again, this was 1 5/8 yards of fabric. I still have it folded like it came off the bolt. We're going to unfold it in a second, alright? This is a big long piece. What we're going to do, we need to cut our strips for our first border, which is the solid fabric here. And those strips are going to be cut at 1.5 inches. And because this is a very long piece, we actually only need 2 strips cut at 1.5, and we're cutting it along the selvage. So here's my selvage, is at the bottom right here. We're cutting it even with the selvage. So we're first going to cut the selvage off, then cut 2 1.5-inch strips. I'm just going to fold my fabric together again, keeping my selvages together along the bottom here. And I have to fold it extra because I'm using my little mat for the camera. So, and I'm just going to cut it, I think, across here so it's wide enough. So, what we're going to do first is we're going to cut off the selvage. Now this is kind of, I want to see how it's folded and see where the selvage is. So right about here is the selvage, and I'm just going to make sure I cut all that off. Now I have a really thick section because I folded it together pretty good. You might have to do the same thing. You might be able to cut it not quite so folded and not have such a struggle. But alright, we're going to chuck that selvage aside. Now, when I cut 1.5-inch or smaller strips, I'm going to use the marks on my ruler, not on the board, which is fine because I put it at an angle anyway. So I'm going to keep this very carefully, and I'm going to rotate this whole thing over here so I can cut. I'm right-handed, so I want to make sure I'm cutting it on the right side here. Keep that together. Hopefully I didn't get any of that cut apart or moved apart. Put it on the 1.5. I'm lining up with my ruler, not with anything on the mat, and we're going to cut. And hopefully, you know, if you have a wider mat you're using, you won't have to have it folded in such a huge quantity. I have a whole bunch of layers in here. So there's those pieces. So anyway, you only need to cut one time because each cut, because our fabric is folded, and again, it's not like when we're cutting the normal way, which is how it comes off the bolt, where we're cutting from the selvage up to the fold, and that cuts one piece at a time folded in half. When we're cutting parallel, even with the selvage edge, it's folded in half, so we're cutting two pieces at one time, okay? So you need one cut it there, and then while we have this all ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and cut our binding, because we're gonna need probably 3 or 4 strips. I'm gonna make 2 cuts, because again, we're getting 2 strips per cut, and I'm cutting mine at 2 1/2. You can cut yours at whatever size you usually do your binding at, 2, 2 1/4, whatever. Now's the time to cut off your strips for the binding. So we're going to be cutting off, I'm making mine 2 1/2 inches, and I'm going to cut off 2 cuts of this because that's going to give me 4 strips. And I'm going to set this aside till the end, obviously, when we're ready to put the binding on. And we're going to do a separate video on how to do the binding on this, because in case you hadn't noticed, there is 90-degree angles on this table runner, and there are 120-degree angles on the table runner. So, it's not hard to put the binding on. Don't be scared to do it. So we will do it separately though, because we don't want this video to be like overly long, and that way if you're ever doing something and need to make it, you don't have to watch through the whole video again. You can just watch the binding part. So watch for a separate video on that one. And we'll post a link in the comments below when we have that posted. These are 2 cuts, which is going to give you 4 strips for the binding. So we're going to set those aside for later. Alright, now what we're left with here is a piece that is about 58.5 inches long by, it should be, if we're lucky, when we unfold it, because here was the fold again, this is going to be, it's going to be a lot bigger than what we're going to need, but, because when we had it folded, it's about 12, so we're about 24 inches, you might have a little bit bigger. So set this aside. Now we'll iron this and press this out later. You're going to want to try to press it really good to get that crease out of the middle, but we'll worry about that later when we're ready to base this. Alright, so here's our table runner again. We are going to start putting our borders on the long section. We're going to call those the top and the bottom, because that's what they are. So we're going to put that on here and here. Alright, so you're going to take one of your long 1 1/2 inch strips here. Obviously it's going to be too long, don't worry about it. We're going to cut it off later. Alright, now we don't have no selvages, because remember we didn't cut with the normal way of cutting. We cut it along the selvage, so we don't have to worry about selvages on the ends of these. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to leave a little bit overhang on the side. You actually don't need a whole lot for these sections here, but I like to just leave a little bit extra just in case. So hopefully the camera can pick this up. We're going to lay this on here. You can pin it if you want, so we're going to flip this. Again, this is a style, so I don't have a right or wrong side. If you're using like a tone or a pattern side, make sure you're putting your right sides together. And we're just going to lay this down here. And again, just leave the excess hang off. We're going to cut it off after we sew it. And you're going to sew your 1/4 inch seam along here. And then you can take another long strip here and lay this along up here. And again, right sides together. If you have a right and a wrong side, leave a little bit overhang off the edge there. I like to basically have my corner kind of come in contact with this edge here. So we're going to do that. So you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along there and a 1/4 inch seam along here. And then we'll be right back and I'll show you how we're going to trim it. So we've sewed on the top and the bottom strips. And I press my strips, border strips, I always press them towards the border. That's just my personal preference. I know you're not supposed to press to the light, but I always find it just helps it to lay better. So what we're going to do now, we need to trim these edges off of our border strips. So we're going to take our cutting mat here, and we are using our table runner as the guide. And first we have just this little overhang at the beginning here. We're going to line our ruler up with this long edge right here of our piece. And let me make sure this is actually in the camera so you can see it. Alright, so our rulers line up against here, and we're just going to trim this even with our table runner piece. There might be a little bit of a hump there underneath because, we didn't quite cut all that off when we first cut it. Alright, And we're going to do the same thing to the other end that's over here where our long side is dangling off of. Again, we're going to take our ruler, have our ruler even with this edge here, and we're just going to cut that off. Now this big piece here we're cutting off, you're going to save because we're going to use it for our next piece. And same thing on the other side then. Line your ruler up with the edge here and trim and save that long piece. And one more side. We have this little doodad down here, and we're going to line this up with our edge, and we're going to, oh, my ruler slipped a little bit there, and we're going to trim that off. And that piece we can chuck. Alright, so now your end should look like this. Here, let me move it around so you can see a little bit better on the camera. So our ends are going to be even with our point here. And that'll be like that on both sides. Okay, so what we're going to do for this next part here is we're going to lay this strap, this piece of fabric, strip, not strap, right here. And I'm going to lay this edge, since we cut the one part off on an angle, but we still have a straight edge on the one side, I'm going to lay my straight edge, my 90-degree corner edge, with the 90-degree corner of the table runner, and just let the rest of it hang off up here. Let me move this down so it's in the camera a little bit here. Let the rest hang off, because we're going to cut up here even with our table runner. But this way we don't have to trim the one side, all right? And you're going to do that to both sides, and I like to do mine on opposite sides, so I'm starting on this side on the top, so I will start on the other side on the bottom edge on the other side, and I'm going to lay both of these down and on both sides on opposite angles. Again, you don't have to do opposite angles, it's just me, I kind of like the way it looks if you offset them and do these two and then do these two. It's no right or wrong on this one. It's just my preference. So I'm going to lay both of these, one here and one on the opposite side, and I'm going to sew them. I'm going to lay them so that the 90-degree angles are together and sew up here, and then we will press towards the border, or however you press the first one, press it the same way, and then we will trim and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We sewed one of these strips on each of the sides. So, and our one is even with this top here. If for some reason yours is not even across, make sure you trim that even across with this so it makes a straight line. But on our other side down here, how we want to trim this one here is we're going to take our ruler up against the bottom of that our long strip of their first border that we did. And you want to have that so it's even across. And we're going to trim this one off right like this. Okay, so it's even now with that. And we'll do the same thing with the other side here. Again, this should be straight across here, so it should match there. And then we're going to take this and we're going to lay our ruler so it's even. And we are going to trim. Alright, and both my strips fell on the floor. We're going to save, these strips should be big enough now to put one on each side of our final seam here. So this is where we need just a little, again, close your cutter, always bad to leave it open. So we need to have a little hanging off here. So what I do, this is this piece I have left from my strip. I'm just going to center it and then we'll trim it off later because we're not going to have a whole lot of waste. So we're just going to put this again right here, right here. I mean, essentially this is going to be even with here, but I just like to make sure it's all nice and trimmed at the end. So I'm just going to center it and then trim off all the sides when I go. So I'm going to do this one on this side, put the other strip on the other side, sew these at the 1/4 inch seam, press them the way I press the rest of these, and we'll be done with our first border. Okay, we have our final 2 strips on. Now we just need to trim them so that we have a nice even border here. So we're going to just take our ruler right up against the edge of this strip that we already had sewn down here. And we're going to trim this off even with that. So that should give us a nice 90-degree angle up here at this corner. And then this corner here, the same as we did before, we're going to take our ruler against the long edge of the strip right here. And we are going to cut even with that. Right like that. And do the same thing for the other side. Again, we're going to put our ruler up against the edge here of this strip and trim, and that should be a nice, 90-degree angle there. I didn't cut off my threads when I started. And then one more time here, we're going to put this here, and we're going to put this here, and we're going to cut like this so it's even along the side right here. All right, here is our first border on our piece. All right, now I like to go through right now and just give it all a nice press again before we start the next border. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then grab your extra squares that we had left over from when we put our tops together, because we're going to use those next, and we'll be right back. For our next step, we need to do our outer border, and you're going to take the pile of squares that you have left over that we didn't use for the top. You can leave 2 of them aside, and what you're going to do, you'll just lay them out again in whatever order is pleasing to you. Just, you know, trying to, you don't have to be picky here. I tend to be just a little bit pickier and try not to get the same colors and the same prints and stuff next to each other. But you're going to lay it out. You should have 18 squares left over, but remember we're going to set 2 aside, so you should have 16 squares for this part. Again, lay them out in one big row, so all 16 of them out in one row in whatever, you know, order you like and is pleasing to you. And we're going to sew these together with a 1/4-inch seam. So just flip them on top of each other, sew a 1/4-inch seam, and sew the whole way down. So these will all be out in a row here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back from the sewing machine now, and I did press my seams all to one side. So now you should have one really long strip of 16 squares. Oops, we're a little twisted here. Of 16 squares all sewn together. So what we're going to do now, we're going to cut this apart down the middle. And you'll just use, I like to do this a little bit at a time because sometimes your long strip can get a little twisty as you go. So I prefer to just take my cutting mat, and again we're going to use our markings on our ruler here, not on the board. And these are 5-inch squares, so we're going to cut 2 1/2. So we'll just lay this out here, make sure it's straight, and just cut small sections at a time instead of, you know, you could fold it in half and cut it all at once, but sometimes, like I said, I find that your long strip tends to get just a little wavy, so I find it's easier just to kind of cut little section at a time. So we'll make sure it's 2 1/2, and we're just going to cut up to where my ruler ends, and then I'll just keep doing this the whole way down the strip. Again, just lining up my ruler. The 2 1/2-inch line will be against the side of my strip. Like I said, if you want to save time, you could do this all at once by folding your strip in half and cutting. I just think this gets a little bit more accurate this way. So when you're done, you'll have 2 strips then that are 2 1/2 inches wide by, you know, the 16 squares long. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of this. Okay, I'm going to make my last cut here of the strip, and then I'll have 2 strips, again, 2 1/2 inches wide by the 16 squares long. So we're going to take these. Now I had words in my print, so I was kind of careful to make sure that my words all face the same direction. And when I put the border onto my table runner, I'm going to make sure my words, I think I'm going to have them face towards the outside. So if you have words, you probably want to make sure, or like directional prints, you probably want to make sure that they're all facing the same way as you put your squares together. And then make sure they're facing the same direction as you put them on the table runner. If you're lucky enough to not have words or anything that's directional, you can just kind of slap this on and go. So, all right, we're going to take our strips now, move the cutting mat off the side here, go back to our table runner, which is right here. And what I'm going to do first, I'm going to fold it in half and just finger press. You could pin it. I'm just going to finger press here at the mark in the middle, just to make a mark in the middle. You know, we don't need to be 100% accurate on this one, so you don't need to like actually get a pen out and mark it, but you know, you could put pins in there. I'm just going to finger press and hope for the best. So we're going to take this over here. So we're going to take 1 strip, and what we're going to do is, and this is just me being, I'm slightly, I like to be quick, I like to be easy, but sometimes I do like to be a little bit more accurate and right on. So I'm going to take that mark that I finger pressed into my table runner, which is right here, and line it up with the seam line of the strip. So you have a little bit hanging off here, which is what you want. So you don't want to line it up here and have it be too short. So you should have 4 blocks. And I want it to end up with these words out. I have words right here on this strip here. So I want to make sure that I'm going to flip it over right like this, so that when I sew it and flip it back out, my words will be facing out. So again, I have it lined up so that the seam line is right there at the middle. And I'm going to flip this over, and don't worry about, you're going to have a whole lot of excess on the end here. Let me move it in the camera. You'll have a whole lot of excess in here. Don't cut it off right now, just leave it on. You'll just sew a 1/4 inch seam. You'll take it over. I will probably put some pins in it just to kind of keep it kind of steady here. And you'll stop sewing when you reach the end of your table runner, which is right here. But you leave this extra here. We're going to cut it kind of like we did our first border. And then you'll do the same thing for the other side, the opposite side. Again, you'll take your strip, and I do have words on here, so I want to make sure my words are facing out. And this is up to you. These strips are, since we cut them in half, they are 2 of the same. So I don't want it to be like a mirror image. I like it to be a little bit more fancy. So even though I'm probably going to start sewing down here at this side, I don't want to have my strip, and this is up to you. If you want it to be mirror image, go for it. But if I start at this end on this side and this end on here, I will have the same strips. If you notice, I have the turquoise dot, this black, this orange check. I kind of don't want that. I want it to be more random. So I'm going to start and line this up with this side. So both of them are lining up here, so they have different prints. That's just me. You can do what you want to do. If you want mirror image, by all means, start opposite corners with the same side of the strip and kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with this strip here. So here's my finger press line. I'm going to line that seam up right with that. So I have a little extra hanging out over here. So again, it's 4 strips. You'll have tons of extra at the end. It's okay. We need that for our sides. And I'm going to flip this on top, right sides together. And I said I probably will pin it just so it kind of stays there. You don't have to be 100%, you know, it depends on how OCD you are with things. If you want it to line up exactly, you want to make sure you put lots of pins to make sure it's there. I'm going for the close is good enough for me kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and take it over to my machine and sew a 1/4 inch along this here. And then we're going to come back and we will trim it. Okay, we're back after we sewed on the 2 long borders here for the outside border. Now we need to trim these ends off a little bit to make it match so we can put our next border on. So what we're going to do, kind of the same as what we did for that the inside border here. We're going to take our ruler, we're going to line it up with the edge of this strip here, right here, and we're going to chop off. Make sure that this is all nice and smooth when you do this. Everything is nice and flat, and cut that part off there. And then do the same thing for the opposite end here. Again, we're going to line up our ruler with this edge of the inside border here and cut off this remaining part of what we just sewed. So you have a little scrap like that. And we'll flip it around. This is where we have our long edges hanging out here. But we're going to do the same thing. Just make sure your extras are out of the way so we don't accidentally cut them off. So get this nice and smooth here. And we're going to take our ruler and we're going to line it up with this edge of this inside border here. Make sure your fabric's all nice and smooth and out of the way here. And we're going to cut this off. Now we're going to save this long piece here for our next border. And slide this down on the mat again. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And one more time, we're going to line our ruler up with this border here and cut this off even with there. I'm going to line this up so that a seam line, so I have the seam between this peach and the black fabric here. The seam line is going to come just a little bit beyond. It can be even with, but I like to do just a little bit beyond. That way you're sure you're good there. Have the seam line be right there. I mean, you can also, if you like what this looks like here, you could also just start it at an end. But you have 2 strips to work with, so you can kind of see, you know, which pattern you like. You don't want to use something in the middle, or you'll run out of. You need the extra to do the other side, so don't use a middle. But you can decide which one of the ends you would like to use. Either this one, or like I said, you can start it here so that this little extra doohickey there is on the end and it starts here. So it's going to take three blocks worth. So you're gonna do this here. Like I said, I just start just sewing a seam line just a little bit to the side. That way you can get a fresh, clean cut when we cut our next portion here. So I have words on this one, so I'm gonna make sure my words go out. And I'll flip this here, and I'll pin that probably in place, and sew a 1/4 inch seam here. And then again, this isn't a you have to do it kind of thing, but the same as our inside border, I kind of like, since I'm starting on this seam here, the top one, I'm going to start, let me just put this so you have both of the pointy ends in the camera at one time here. Fold this out of the way here. So since I'm starting with this one on this side, I'm going to start with this one on this side here, just so you kind of have a little bit of like, it just looks nicer that way. But you don't have to do it. If you forget, don't rip it out or anything. So again, I'm going to place my, I'm going to place this just so that my seam line is just a little bit past here, and flip this over and pin it in place. This will take 3 blocks or 3 half squares, whatever you want to call it, worth of your strip. And then the rest of the strip will be for this last seam here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam here, a 1/4 inch seam here, press it out towards the border, and we'll trim it in a second here. Okay, we're back from sewing on the one side of both of our short sides here. So again, we just need to trim this. Let's take our ruler. We're going to line it up against the short side right here on this inside border, and then trim, and just make sure everything's, in its place. Trim this off. Save this chunk of fabric for our next, let's trim those fringes off there, for our last border here. And the same thing with this side. Just make sure everything is smooth and in its position here. We're going to line the ruler up with this outside edge of this border we just sewed on the long side. And we're going to trim that off and flip it around to the opposite end. And I think this is the one that I changed my mind on how I wanted it to look. So we're now going to do the same thing. I think by now you kind of get what you're doing. Line this ruler up with this edge of the inside border. Make sure this is all nice and smooth, or straight and smooth up here. Oops, I got a fringe caught on there. And discard that, and then we'll cut our long part off here. And again, we're just going to make sure everything is pressed and smooth and not wonky here when we go to cut it. And line up your ruler with this outside edge of that outer border, and we're going to cut this off here. So one more step here, 2 more little parts of the border to put on, and we'll be done with the top. What we're going to do for this one, and again, you have 2 sections to pick from, so pick whichever one you like the best here. So what we're going to do now, again, you have 2 sections to go with, and we have a little extra here, because we could have got away with using 15 squares when we pieced our long strip together of the 5-inch blocks. We use 16, that way you have just a little bit of extra, and you can have a little bit more placement choices. What we want to do here, it's going to make it look like we have a 2.5-inch square in this corner. So you're going to place this strip down, and it doesn't matter which one you use or where you put it. Like I said, you have this square to work off of, or you can move it up one and use this square. If you wouldn't have words, you could flip it the opposite way too. But since I have words that have to go that are directional, I only have 2 choices. You would have 4 if you don't have directional fabric right here. So we're going to line up, and I will pin this, and I will start sewing from this corner down, whether you have to sew with your strip on top or your table runner top on top. I want to start here and sew this way when I go to sew. So we're going to place this seam line of these 2 blocks right here, which is in my case is this green and this, or the peach one, and we're going to line it up so that it meets this seam line right here between this block here on our border and our inside border. So this seam and this seam right here you want to match. So hopefully you can see that on the camera. So I will flip that over, and luckily my seams are going the opposite direction, so I can nest that. And I will put a pin in there. Like I said, I will start sewing from here down. That way this doesn't move, because I want this to be perfect, or as close to perfect as we can get. Remember, close is good enough. Unless you're really OCD, then it's not. And then I will do the same thing on this end here. And again, I don't have, oh yeah, I do have words right here. So I can either start it like this, or I can move it up one. I think I do like that peach one in the corner there. So I'm going to start it here so that my border between the peach and this light colored one here, which actually does have words on it. Again, if you wouldn't have words, you would have 4 more choices because you could flip it this way and do one of these two. But I have words that are directional. So I want the seam line between this peach and this tan to match the seam line between the black block and my inside border. So I want that seam to go right straight down. And when we trim this off, it's going to look like we have a 2.5-inch square on our piece perfectly on the 2 ends of our table runner. So I will again flip this like this, pin this in place, and if by chance my seams happen to be pressed this way and the bottom is this way, if yours are pressed the opposite way, just take it to the iron and repress this seam on the strip here so that it goes opposite direction of your table runner so you can nest them really good and make them match. And again, I will start sewing from this point this way so that I can make sure that this seam right here stays really good. So I'm going to go take this over, sew my last 2 seams, press them out towards the border, and then we'll trim our last final trimmings and we'll have our table topper top done. Okay, we finished sewing on our final 2 pieces of the outside border. A couple final cuts here to trim this off. Again, I'm sure you know by now what we're doing, but see how that looks so nice there? Our seam line just continues. So our first cut here, you're going to see this 2.5-inch square pop up. We're going to line our ruler up again with this outside edge of the border here. I'll make sure everything is nice and smooth and straight. And we're going to trim that off, and voila, we have this nice 2.5-inch block. And then our final seam here, or our corner to cut off here. At this side, again, we're going to line up our ruler with this edge of the outside border, the long edge there, and we're going to cut this off and throw away the scrap. And there's this side cut off and looking really, really nice. See how we have 2 more cuts to make on the opposite side here. Again, your first one here, we're going to line our ruler up with this long edge of the outside border to cut off and just when you're cutting this off, just kind of make sure everything is like pulled into place and not crinkled up or anything. You kind of lose your squareness a little bit. And trim that off. And so we have this nice little 2.5-inch block here. And then our final cut here, again, line your ruler up with the bottom edge of this long side. Make sure this is nice and smooth here before you cut. Line up your ruler. And this is our final cut. This side is done now also. See how we have a nice, just a nice pointy table runner. So here is our finished table topper top. So what I'm going to do now is just give it a final pressing before I put it together or sandwich it to quilt it. So I'm just going to take it to the iron, give it a final press, and kind of make sure everything is pressed out towards the sides and towards the ends, and everything is sitting as flat as you can be. And then we'll get ready to baste it and quilt it and bind it. But this is your top is finished. Yay! Okay, so all we're doing here is basting this now. All I did was take my backing fabric, laid it down. If you have it right or wrong side, make sure it's right side down. So this should be your wrong side. Then the layer of batting. I'm just using polyester. You can use whatever you want. You probably just want to keep it like on the thinner side. Then you'll lay your table runner on top here. And I like to start in the middle and smooth it really nice with my hands. I do like to use the 505 spray even for table runners. I'm not using it right here just because I'm too close to the camera. I don't want to get spray on it. If you're careful, you don't spray it all over the place, but I'm not the most careful person in the world sometimes. So if I were to use the 505 spray, I would get it all set up and nice, and I would probably like flip half of it, starting like with between the backing and the batting, and just put a little thin layer of spray down, smooth it out, and then flip this halfway over, spray, and then smooth this out here, and then do the other side the same way. You know, don't be afraid about quilting. I know some of you are like really scared of the actual quilting process, you don't have to be scared to do it. So I will put some pins in here. Just some ideas for quilting. If you don't have anything, if you're scared to do anything fancy or you can't do free motion yet because you just don't get the hang of it, it's okay, all right? Your machines, a lot of them have like a million different decorative stitches. Just stitch in the ditch with a decorative stitch. You'll probably want to start at like one of these two center lines, work here, and then work your way out, and then work in the middle and do the other side. And then there's two different directions here, so you probably want to start in the middle again and do the opposite direction. And if you do it this way, and then this way, and then this way, you won't distort your piece as much as if you all start at the bottom and go up. You tend to distort your fabric, your quilt top that way if you always go in the same direction. So use a decorative stitch and just stitch in the ditch. You could do 2 lines of stitching, like 1/8 of an inch on either side of your seam line. You could just do a straight stitch in the ditch. You can do little scallop thingies in here. You know, just do what you can, but you just want to, again, just keep in mind that the end goal of quilting anything is so that you're attaching all your layers together, so that when you go to wash your piece, it doesn't get all lumpy and bumpy, all right? So that's the whole goal of quilting it. So don't get too, you know, freaked out or too scared to do it. Just, you know, do what you can do. Decorative stitches, straight stitches, gut fancy, whatever you want to do. So you're going to do this, then when you're all done, we will obviously trim along your edges here, and then we put the bind. So go ahead and quilt it, trim it, and then, you know, you'll be finished with this except for putting the binding on, which we'll show you in a separate video. So thank you very much for paying attention, and hope you have fun making this. Again, it just takes a little bit of fabric and a turn back and you're good to go. Makes a nice gift. All right, thank you. See you later.